on the gently rising land of the coastal plain, at about 1 kilometre inland from the sea, lies Lempa-Lakkoi, the Chalcolithic settlements, from sometime a bit after 3500 BC through till about 2400. The site has been known to the people who live around here for a very long time. The farmers would have noticed the very obvious traces of ancient artifacts in the plough soil. When the excavation began here in 1976, it became obvious very quickly that the site was not a deeply stratified one. The remains of the buildings, as you see, are not very deeply buried beneath the general ground surface. So for that reason, we thought that if we wanted visitors to come here and get some benefit from visiting it, it might be a good thing to produce replicas of these ancient buildings. That's one reason we did it anyway. The second reason mainly was that we thought that in order to further our understanding of these buildings, it would be good to actually build some for ourselves. Buildings of the sort you see that we've reconstructed are pretty durable as long as you put in regular maintenance. Each winter, when the prehistoric people were living in the building, you can imagine after every major rainstorm, they would have thrown a bucket of soil and perhaps a child onto the roof and say, well, fix it, patch it up now, and we won't have trouble with it. We did keep on top of it for about 25 years, actually, doing regular maintenance with no huge problems. But after about 25 years, the building did become rather unsafe, and it was very clear that we'd have to re-roof it entirely, replacing all of the structural timbers. So what we've got is an arrangement of different sizes of pine beams. Largest ones, slightly smaller, smaller still, above which is a layer of myrtle scrub, which we've got up here. And finally on top of that, seaweed, and topped off with local subsoil, white calcareous soil. So we've got to peel this roof off now. That's the way we constructed it. Now we've got to deconstruct it. We've got to take it apart layer by layer, shoveling off the white calcareous soil from the top of the roof. We're setting it aside, and we're going to reapply it in due course when we've finished the roof. Not so well preserved, might have to renew that. We shall see. After about 25 years, the timber work seemed to be the most vulnerable point in the building, most vulnerable to rot, and timbers also in this climate and region are very prone to being eaten by various kinds of insects. This post particularly has, we can see here it's extremely rotten, and we can hear it's hollow. We've got 4 posts and 4 horizontal members that run between them, and we've got to replace that entire central structure also.
1, 2, 3, no.
Now.
Yeah, wait, wait.
Let's see how rotten it is. Oh my goodness, there's hardly any timber left there, is there?
See? The beauty of these buildings, it's sort of constant recycling really. As they get damaged and age, little bits fall off, and then eventually you decide to repair them, and you just pick up the bits that have fallen off and put them back again with a bit of water and a bit of new seaweed. We had quite a big renovation job there to jack up those beams, reconstruct the wall and reinstate the roof, and we have learnt, I think, a great deal of detail now about how it was to make these buildings, how it was to use these buildings, and what you had to do to keep them functional for a substantial period of time. Characteristic feature of these Chalcolithic roundhouses is a central fireplace connected to the interior face of the wall by these radial plastered ridges, usually enclosing an area which is furnished with a rather higher quality floor. And one can imagine sleeping around what is effectively a night storage heater, perhaps. We have the feeling that this would have been the main reception area of the building, kept sort of clean and tidy perhaps, as opposed to the rest of the building where there are all kinds of materials stored, perhaps some animals also stabled in here. This is an original Chalcolithic door pivot stone. I found it in the local fields, only a few meters from here, churned up by the plough out of context. So I felt at liberty to reuse it and put it back after a resting period of perhaps 4,000 years to its original use. And as you'll see, it very effectively forms the base for the doorpost to pivot on. All of these features of the base of the building are quite well known. Excavations have revealed on this site and about 2 kilometers away, in Cyprus particularly, multiple examples of building bases. As we were coming to the end of building our first reconstructed roundhouse, the large one, we were very fortunate at about that time to uncover in our excavations at Cyprus a bowl decorated with red motifs painted on a white slip. This house bowl was something different. It had modelled integrally into the piece architectural details. There was a doorway, there was a clay door that pivoted in this arrangement. Inside there was a central fireplace depicted, modelled in clay. The fireplace was connected by low radial ridges to the interior wall face. Given that the house model was clearly a representation of a fairly standard sort of middle Chalcolithic building, we felt that it might be appropriate to embellish our reconstructed building here. This interior mural art was done when the plasterwork was reasonably fresh. We've used probably something very similar to the original paint that would have been used both on the house model and in building decoration by Chalcolithic people. It's very simply natural red ochre, which is available in certain parts of Cyprus, mixed with water and applied with a brush. The higher up we go in the structure, the less hard evidence we have for either materials or techniques of building. Where we run short of archaeological evidence, we look either at traditional buildings of more recent times, or we apply reasonable common sense and try to keep things as simple and straightforward as possible. For the window here, we've done something very similar to the way in which the door pivots, except rather than having a stone at floor level, I've set into the wall here a wooden element with a depression in so that the window rotates as does the door. People often question what evidence we might have for windows, and I do have to admit that the evidence is very sparse. One example, at the site of Cyprus, there had been an aperture in an otherwise collapsed mud brick wall. It tumbled over sideways, possibly as a result of an earth tremor. So there we have it, perhaps a little over-interpretation of a limited piece of evidence, and I deliberately set it on this side of the building so that it catches the early morning sun. This site of Lemba, along with other sites that have been investigated in this region and in more distant parts of Cyprus, have yielded quite a wealth of evidence for the way people lived in Cyprus in prehistoric times. We're undoubtedly missing a lot of settlements that remain still to be discovered. I suspect that that's just the tip of a larger iceberg.